We're rolling.
Joined now by Rink-Wide Vancouver's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, as we head into what we anticipate will be a very, very busy week for the hockey club. Jeff, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. Yeah. I mean, end of the hockey season, but what a wild week ahead for the Vancouver Canucks. There's a lot to do here in a relatively short period of time, and that includes the draft, where they're going to be bystanders, we think, for the most part, but still that's going to take their attention when they've got this long to-do list. So lots to get after here in the next 7 days.
I envision Patrick Allvin just walking around like swinging like a watch on a chain and just trying to wheel and deal. Like he's got nothing to do. He doesn't have to go up on stage, so he's just gonna be wheeling and dealing, isn't he? Isn't that right, Jeff?
Well, I don't know. He could use that first round to be negotiating contracts with agents and players, because he doesn't have to worry about making a first-round selection as it stands right now. And I think the Philip Ronic extension sort of ended any speculation of the Canucks, playing a card to get back into the first round. I think they're going to be bystanders here for round one at the very least, and then they don't have a second rounder either. So going to be playing the waiting game for sure. Beyond that, what Patrick Allvin is able to accomplish in Vegas or before he gets to Vegas, I guess these next few days will tell us.
Do you think Nikita Zadorov gets re-signed this week?
Well, as I said to you last week, this parting, it hasn't taken place. Certainly nobody has thrown down and walked out entirely. And so as long as that possibility exists, I think there's a good chance that something gets done. Now, since you guys and I last did this, the whole idea of Ilya Mikheyev absolutely being in play and Dan Milstein having agency now to try to facilitate a deal, I think that indicates to you just how much the Vancouver Canucks want to free up additional cap space to make a few things happen internally. A Mikheyev deal can still take place at some point beyond free agency, but it won't give them whatever cap space they're able to free up to make some things happen here in the short term. So I think they're motivated. They'd love to move off Mikheyev. Again, and I know it's been discussed a lot in the market, is it a sweetener? Is it retention? Like, what's the best path forward here? And I'm not sure that there's a great answer for the Vancouver Canucks, but if they can swing some sort of deal there, I'm not closing the door on Nikita Zadorov re-signing with the Vancouver Canucks.
Puckpedia says a second-round pick. Jeff, would you part with a second-round pick to shed the Mikheyev salary?
If I could do it for the third rounder that they had this year, I would just punt on this year's draft. You've already parted with the first and second. Like, honestly, I would just say, see you next year, whatever next year's draft looks like. But I don't think a third rounder does it. So then it brings you back to, how much draft capital do you have at a time where you don't have a whole lot in the system? These are these crunchy decisions that this front office has to make. And I guess, I'm at the point now where, like, they're in win now mode. We know the state of the contracts of Thatcher Demko for 2 more years and Quinn Hughes for 3. That kind of feels like the window here, and you kind of have to just roll with it. You've put yourself in this position. You've come off a nice season. It does feel like now is the time for the Vancouver Canucks. And if it's a second rounder, I think you kind of hold your nose and make that deal. And obviously it's not this year's second rounder. So again, it's just kind of punting the prospect issue down the road a little bit. But if it's all about winning in the here and now, then you're sort of too far down that road now, I think, to turn back.
They show some restraint too. Remember all that talk about flipping Lindholm at the deadline to try to turn him into Gensel. And, that probably would have cost a draft pick as well. In the end, by not completely going crazy at the trade deadline, they've got the draft capital that they might have spent there to spend now to create that cap space and maybe turn that cap space into Jake Gensel and ultimately get him in the end as well. Are they in win now mode? Like, is it all chips in for this coming season? Or do you think that's still a couple of seasons away, which would ironically put them into that fatter OEL territory, obviously?
No, I think with what they did this year with 50 wins on 109 points and winning the regular season division and getting the fan base engaged and back on board, I think there's some pressure on this management group now. They were brought in to win championships. It wasn't to continue to try to build up things and accumulate pieces. It was all about delivering that one prize that has never been delivered to Vancouver in more than 50 years of existence now, and that's the Stanley Cup. And so, we all know that there is a core in place. That part's undeniable. It's now going about supporting that core, and they did a nice job last year in free agency, but this is the challenge for this management group, is to replicate what they were able to accomplish on July 1st last year. There's no guarantees that you can do it year in and year out, a year after year, and to get a number of guys on short-term contracts that came in and played key supporting roles. Now they've got to try and do it again, but they do have the coach of the year, and that's going to be a selling point. They've got a player like Quinn Hughes who's likely to win the Norris this week, and that's a selling point. So, I think it's a destination again. And so they've got money to spend. That's the other thing that we haven't seen the Canucks management group in a handful of years have money to play with. And the last group that had money to play with didn't spend it wisely. So I think this front office has built up, goodwill, benefit of the doubt on the part of the fan base, but they are going to try to have to pull rabbits out of a hat here for a second straight July 1st. And no, I think they're in win now mode. Absolutely. Again, 2 more years with Thatcher Demko at $5 million. Quinn Hughes on one of the best value contracts, as it turns out, in the National Hockey League. If those guys stick around and re-sign, their numbers are going through the roof, and that's going to take away any wriggle room that the Vancouver Canucks have, even as the cap escalates here. So these are challenges. These are decisions that this front office is facing here in the next week or so. Not the extensions on Demko and Hughes, but just how to support this group. And ultimately, it's not about running it back with last year's team, which was very good, but it's about getting better. And I think you have to keep in mind, too, guys, the parameters of what the Canucks are up against in whether the Oilers win the Stanley Cup. They're coming back with another. They're the Oilers. They got McDavid and Draisaitl next year. That team's going to be a challenge. The Vegas Golden Knights, last year's Stanley Cup champs, they're not going to take lightly to getting punted in the first round. That they're always going to be aggressive. This Pacific Division is going to be difficult, and that's just the landscape of the life the Vancouver Canucks are in right now. So win now mode, yes, but certainly there are challenges that will face the Canucks next season.
Our first chance to talk to you since the Philip Ronic re-signing, and of course, a very cheatery press availability. Jeff, what did you make of the events of last week with Philip Ronic?
I liked the contract. I didn't love it, but the way the system is set up, he knew he was going to cash in as a 26-year-old right shot guy with arbitration rights coming off a 48-point season. He was going to get a massive raise. And now there was always the chatter in the market about $8 million. I'm not sure I ever fully bought into that. The fact that he didn't get $8 million, but finishes at 7.25, I don't know if that represents a victory for the Vancouver Canucks. It's just somewhere close to market value for a player of that type who had those arbitration rights. So, I wrote about it at Canucks Army. I think part of the equation here is he proved to be a really good, almost perfect partner for Quinn Hughes. And there is massive value in that Quinn Hughes on his own, we've seen, is a incredible hockey player, but Hughes helped Hronik, and Hronik helped Hughes get to 92 points in that Norris that he's probably going to get his hands on moving forward here. So I think that there's real value in that for the Vancouver Canucks. You keep your captain happy. You keep his wingman there with him. There's no reason to think that those two can't continue to be dominant as a pairing. Only 2 pairings in the National Hockey League played more than Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronik together last season. So they were used a lot in all situations. They rose above. They outscored opponents by close to 30 when they were on the ice at 5-on-5. And we're seeing this around the National Hockey League, whether it's Makar and Taves in Colorado right now with Bouchard and Ekholm, the way that they have played. You build up this sort of super pair and really try to make hay when they're on the ice, and then you hope that the rest of the group behind them on the defensive depth chart can hold their own at the very least, and that's kind of where the Canucks are right here, right now. So I was happy to see Hronik. Had some jokes on Zoom with the media as well. And why wouldn't he be happy? He just cashed in at $58 million, and his future is certain now for the next almost decade. So he seemed like he was in a pretty good mood, relaxed, and he talked about needing to get stronger so that he can be the same player in the second half in the playoffs that he was in the first half last season.
Should the Canucks go out and find a number 3 defenseman, a true one? Like, is Nikita Zadorov even a number 3 defenseman? Because behind that top 2 pair, Carson Soucy's not a number 3. There are a few defensemen available. Should that be a priority? Is Zadorov a number 3 in your mind?
Well, I think the way they utilized him in the playoffs, he kind of turned out to be that guy. But on a depth chart right now, I've got Quinn Hughes and Carson Soucy on my left side, and then you're probably trying to slot somebody in under those two. Now, when we just talked about Hughes and Ronic, as incredible as they are, Soucy and Myers together gave the Canucks what they were looking for in the playoffs, and that is, these long, rangy guys that did an incredible job of keeping opponents, even McDavid and Draisaitl, to the outside for the most part. But the underlines were not kind to those two guys. Like, they got buried. They took on a ton of water. Ultimately, they didn't drown, but they don't move the puck out of their own zone. They defend way too much. And so, yeah, in a perfect world, you'd have somebody that's able to move the puck a little better than either one of those guys so that you're not spending as much time in your own end. But those players come at a cost. And again, it's where do you want to allocate the cap resources that you've got here? We know that this team needs scoring. It needs help up front. That still has to be, to me, the primary goal here of this week, moving through the draft and into free agency. And again, I just don't think that they've got the trade chips to make a massive trade for a score. So I think you are looking at free agency with all the smoke around Jake Guentzel. There's every reason to believe that the Canucks are going to swing for the fences there. But hey, Gentzel's going to have options. He's going to get his money wherever he goes. There's no absolutely certain lock that Jake Guentzel decides that Vancouver is where he wants to play. And I'm fascinated to see, guys, if Guentzel decides to pick somewhere other than Vancouver, what is plan B, and how does this management group execute that to, again, go and find an upgrade that can come in here and hit the ground running, scoring goals for the Vancouver Canucks next season?
Are you resigned to losing Dakota Joshua?
I think so, unless they can move off Mikheyev in the entirety of that contract. It's been remarkably quiet around Dakota Joshua. I know that there have been stories written, and I think they're kind of the ilk of, here's a guy that, Detroit should go after or Toronto should go after. Like, I'm not sure that we've heard a ton of absolute locks to other franchises, but I think we will here in the next week, because, used to have the speed dating period where teams could actually talk to players. That's not there anymore. But I think we'll start to, as the hockey world descends in Vegas, I think the rumor mill will churn once we get through the Stanley Cup final. I think the rumor mill will churn a little bit. But yeah, I think I am. I think that there's going to be one team out there, and that's all it takes, that, gets mesmerized by this big body that has soft hands, that can score and can also kill penalties. I mean, he's a useful piece, no question about it. But I do think that he's going to be a perfect case of overpayment on July 1st. And, that's where the Canucks have to be wary. And when Patrick Allvin signaled on that exit day about finding the next Dakota Joshua, I think I took him at face value. I think they recognized that they were able, through, a Group 6 channel, to find a player that was undervalued elsewhere, really hadn't hit yet. And they think that with their scouting, and their pro scouting's been really good here for the last couple of years. I think they feel that they can unearth that type of player. It may not be a carbon copy of Dakota Joshua, but yeah, quite frankly, I just think based on what he's going to be able to command, that there will be a team out there that thinks, he's worth whatever it is that he's going to get, but it's going to be too rich for the Vancouver Canucks.
Not just a value contract, though. You think it means physical, big guy, kills penalties, like that model, not just a value contract?
Yeah, and look, the Canucks aren't the biggest team in the world, and we know how much Rick Tocchet loves wall work and board battles. Like, it's going to be a blow if they lose Dakota Joshua. I mean, Rick Tocchet saw something in Joshua when he took over. He was able to get the best out of him down the stretch that first half season that he was behind the bench. And then last year, I mean, it absolutely would have been a 20-goal scorer if he hadn't broken his hand sticking up for Connor Garland in, a fight that turned out to be pointless against Chicago, of all teams, at the bottom of the barrel. But look, that's being a good teammate, and Joshua didn't think twice, stepped in that moment, and that'll gain him respect around the National Hockey League as it did within his own locker room. So, yeah, I mean, you're trying to replace all these pieces, but also one of the most physical forwards in the National Hockey League. Like, it's not going to be an easy replacement, and that's why I say, like, Dakota Joshua, like, good on him. He set himself up with the kind of season he had. This isn't a guy that's been cashing big paychecks since he was 20 years old. He was a late bloomer. So certainly not going to begrudge a guy that chases the bag here when the opportunity presents itself. But yeah, I just, the more I look at the Canucks situation, they can't afford to bring everybody back. And again, I'm not sure that they need to bring everybody back, because this is a team ultimately that fell short in the playoffs. So it's about trying to get better here. But I just think that Dakota Joshua is a piece that they've identified that they're not going to get into a bidding war over. I think they've made a pitch to him. He talked about how much he liked it here in Vancouver. And Jim Rutherford in that question and answer with Sportsnet last week basically said at some point it's on the players that, we've gone as far as we can. A little negotiating through the media, basically saying, like, we're not going to budge off our position here. Take it or leave it. And that's what this week is all about.
Hot take. Quinn Hughes not winning the Norris this week, better for the Vancouver Canucks, fuels a team-wide grudge all of next season. Thoughts?
I don't think you're going to get your wish, but
yeah, I'm fully expecting that he's going to be your Norris winner, so I would be surprised. But look, I'm all for a chip on the shoulder, whatever the reason is, whatever the explanation is. Why, if these guys need motivating, Rick Tocchet talked throughout the year about, people just didn't give them a chance, and every time people doubted the Vancouver Canucks, all they did was win, and he wasn't wrong. And if they used that as some fuel, hey, so be it. So wherever they find their motivation. But as I sit here talking to you guys, I'm going to be surprised if Quinn Hughes isn't the Norris Trophy winner this year.
Rutherford mentioned IMAC last week. Besser is going to be an in-season thing next year. Do you think that's wise? And do you think there's a world where Besser and Gensel can be Vancouver Canucks beyond next season?
I do think it's wise for a couple of reasons. One is, and it was unfortunate the way the season ended with the blood clot, but for a guy that's had injury issues, I think he needs to come back and show that this is behind him and that he can pick up where he left off. I think, it's always a little bit of a fool's game from the club side to be negotiating with guys off a career season that looks like it could be a little bit of an outlier for a guy that had never been to 30 to get to 40. And the other thing is, they always talk about cap flexibility. You can't just keep stacking massive deals one on top of the other. And there's, again, this management group trying to find some cap flexibility and some wriggle room. But this one's on them because we all thought at the time that Mikheyev was a little bit of a luxury that they probably didn't need and couldn't afford. But again, this is a team that couldn't kill penalties back then. I think they saw him as a guy that could come in here and help in that regard. The irony has been that he hasn't done a whole lot of penalty killing, really, or certainly hasn't been used as a primary penalty killer. So I just think a little bit of prudence here, and Besser's got to understand that, it's always a prove-it world. The danger and the downside, I guess, from the hockey club's perspective is if he comes back and picks up where he left off, he's going to be able to command an awful lot. Goal scorers get paid. He's going to be a 28-year-old in February heading to unrestricted free agency. I still think, though, there's a part of me that even though he got to 40 last year and led the Canucks with 7 in the playoffs, that there's a piece of this management group that isn't completely sold on Brock Besser as a long-term solution. So
he's at that price point now, right? So if he holds that, I don't know that he can make himself that much more money. After a 40 goal and a nice playoff, he's here. Meanwhile, in a twisted bit of logic here, I don't think they're hoping that he falls off, but maybe they hope he regresses just a smidge so that they can point to that as an outlier season and get him on a slightly more favorable deal. And hey, some of that playing time is going to be taken up by another acquisition, right? Whether it's Jake Gensler or somebody else, there's going to be another person out there scoring goals, and you can't all score 3 goals in a game. So it's an interesting spot here for the Canucks that they are almost gambling that he has a 30-goal campaign, not a 40.
Right. The thing is, if he gets to 40 again, and we won't know that till the end of next season, but that would be 2 40-goal seasons. Well, guess what? Jake Gensel has 2 40-goal seasons, and his, the numbers being thrown around are somewhere in the $9.5 million range. So if you can be a 2-time 40-goal scorer, I think you can command more certainly than Brock Besser. But you just think from the organization standpoint, they've come through a cycle here where a year ago they couldn't give him away, and it was a problematic contract. And so I think that they're hedging against rushing into anything here with this player right here, right now. Again, when I look at some pitfalls, though, if he has success, they need both Gensel and Besser. If this team is going to get better and truly be a contender, that's what they need. They need 2 legitimate snipers like those 2 guys. And so if Brock Besser comes back and has a ton of success, you can't trade him. If he's having a ton of success, pretty good chance that the team is having success. can you move off that kind of player midseason if you're in win now mode and think that you're a contender? So, it's complicated. It seems like it's always complicated around Brock, as much as we all like the person and sort of pull for, this guy coming through all the personal adversity that he has. It just always feels a little bit complicated around Brock Besser. And I'm not sure that that's going to change as he moves into the final year of his contract.
Lastly, Jeff, on tonight's big game, is it the biggest in NHL history?
Yeah, I'm having trouble with that. I've seen that an awful lot. Maybe it's because there's been so much time between games that people are allowing their minds to wander and trying to build this up. It's Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. Like, I don't care who it is. The Canucks and the Bruins in 2011, the Blues and the Bruins a couple of years ago, Penguins and the Red Wings. It doesn't get a whole lot better in this sport than Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. So, trying to pit one against the other, I get all the storylines here. The comeback has been impressive and incredible and almost unprecedented in, 75 years. McDavid and his legacy, Draisaitl to a lesser degree, and this whole Canadian thing. Like, there are some deep, deep storylines. I totally get that. But I keep coming back to the idea that venue matters. And South Florida isn't exactly the sexiest, iconic venue when we're talking about the greatest games. And really the matchup between Edmonton and Florida, through no faults of their own. Like, I look at 94, the Rangers, Game 7 win at Madison Square Garden with Messier and Richter and Leach and an original 6 team. And, I think those storylines are every bit as rich, if not richer, ending a 54-year drought as the Rangers did, unfortunately, at the expense of the Vancouver Canucks. So, look, biggest game in 3 decades? Sure. Like, I have no issues with that, just with all that's at stake. But I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble getting to the biggest game ever.
If you were not a Canucks reporter, would you cite that 94 game? Does that?
Yeah. I think venue matters. Look, if the Soviets beat Columbus on New Year's Eve in 1975, I don't think we'd look at that game the same way we do as, the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Forum. If the Anaheim Ducks had chased the Soviets out of their building on a Tuesday night, it was the Spectrum, it was the Broad Street Bullies, it was the that all matters. That's all the context that's part of the lore of these games. And so to me, Madison Square, just, it's one of the great stages in the sport. And what is it, Amarant? I'm not even sure what the is. Like, it's gone through so many, hey, it's the biggest game in the history of the NHL. Where's it being played? I don't know. I can't remember the name of the rink.
Sunrise on a map. Nah, I don't know.
Yeah. Anyways, we will all watch with interest. Jeff, thank you for the time, and big week ahead. We'll be calling on you.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.